The movie opens with Captain James facing the Tanaxi delegation in hopes of brokering a truce on behalf of the Forbidden Republic. Things go awry when James presents an old relic as a symbol of peace, but the leader of the delegation takes it the wrong way, and James gets attacked by a dozen of tiny, ferocious beings. James and his crew are on their third year of a 5-year mission. The captain notes and appreciates the sacrifice the crew is making every day, being so far away from home. The crew is scheduled to resupply with a quick departure, and James and Leonard share a bottle of whiskey as James ponders on the point of what he's been doing all these past few years. Leonard notes that all of this time, James has been trying to prove that he can live up to his father's name, but he never really figured out what he actually wanted to be for himself. The Federation starship USS Enterprise gracefully glides into the starbase Yorktown, its crew eagerly anticipating a much-needed resupply and a brief period of rest. Upon landing on Yorktown, Spock is devastated to learn that his older self has died. He vows to carry his mentor's teachings, finding solace in the collective mourning of his people. During their resupply break in Yorktown, Captain James and the Enterprise are dispatched on a rescue mission when a call from Kerala, one of the crew members of a pod drifting out of a nearby uncharted nebula, comes in. Upon embarking on their rescue mission, Captain James asks Ahura to open a ship-wide channel and informs his crew that they're going to be rescuing a crew that's stranded in space, warning them that their course will be taking them through an unstable nebula that will force them to disable communication with the Starfleet, leaving them on their own without any backup. The captain shuts off communication by saying that USS Enterprise has something no other ship has in the fleet, which is its crew. And as the captain terminates the communication, a sense of pride fills the bridge. Upon arrival, a massive swarm of small ships ambushes the Enterprise and quickly begins to tear it apart. And unfortunately, the ship's firepower and shield fail to be a deterrent against their attackers. As the gravity of the situation dawns upon them, the captain makes a difficult decision, ordering Sulu to engage the warp drive and escape the imminent danger. However, to their dismay, the ship's sensors reveal critical damage to the warp drive, rendering it inoperable. Panic sets in as the crew realizes their desperate struggle for survival has reached a seemingly insurmountable obstacle. The swarm's leader, Krall, and his crew board the crippled Enterprise, swiftly capturing and killing many crew members and attempting to capture Abarath, a relic recovered during a recent mission. Commander Spock and Leonard go down to the epicenter of the fight and discover that Krall had managed to get his hands on the Abarath. Spock quickly flees danger and notifies the captain of the situation aboard the ship. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Montgomery attempts to find a way to get the ship to warp out of danger. Captain James leaves control of the ship for Sulu and goes down to the board to help Spock. In a tense confrontation, James and Krall lock eyes, their determination evident. The struggle intensifies as blows are exchanged, and just as Krall gains the upper hand, Montgomery, the ship's brilliant engineer, works tirelessly to repair the damaged warp engine. With a surge of adrenaline, he successfully restores power, allowing the captain to deliver a decisive blow and turn the tide of the battle. James gets his hand on the Abarath when the ship's power catches Krall and his men by surprise, but the swarm immediately follows suit and guts the ship, killing many crew members and leaving the disintegrated Enterprise saucer to crash on Ultimate. The remaining crew tries to escape in pods, but most of the pods are picked up one by the swarm before they make it to planet Ultimate. The captain crash lands with the saucer section of the ships and escapes in a pod at the last minute when Ahura sacrifices herself to help the captain detach the saucer section. Ahura, Sulu, and other survivors get captured by Krall and his men. James and Kerala crash land around the same area, and James immediately confronts her about setting them up, but she replies that she only did it as Krall was holding her shipmates captive. The captain then lets her be, but not without his suspicions. James then asks Chekhov to check if there are any survivors, but they realize that their handheld scanners were too weak to pick up any signals, so the captain suggests that they go back to the saucer and use its scanners to find the survivors. Krall asks Ahura why she sacrificed herself to let the captain escape, and she tells him that Captain James would have done the same for her, and that he'll be coming to save his crew. But Krall states that he's counting on that as Abarath is still in the captain's hands. Spock and Leonard crash land together, and upon landing, Leonard notices that Spock was stabbed by a large shrapnel that just missed his heart by inches. The doctor then heats up a piece of metal that he found in the wreckage and pulls out the shrapnel and seals the wound shut. Montgomery gets surrounded by 3 inhabitants of the planet that don't seem to be Krall's men. He is then saved by Jayla, an alien scavenger who promises to help him find his crew if he helps her fix her ship. Spock and Leonard find a cave that has the same markings as Aberrath on its walls, and Spock suddenly falls down, relenting to his wounds. When Jayla takes Montgomery back to her house, he realizes that she was using an old Federation ship that crash landed on their planet long ago as a base, and she was attempting to fix it throughout the years. Jayla tells Montgomery that she will help him find his people if he helps her fix the ship so they can finally get off the planet once and for all. James and Chekhov, along with Kerala, sneak into the crash section of the saucer in an attempt to get to the bridge to contact the crew. Meanwhile, Uhura and Sulu escape their cell and discover that Krall had been tracking the movement of not only their ship but the entire fleet of the Federation, and Uhura manages to send a distress signal before they're recaptured. James tricks Kerala into revealing her true intentions by using the Aberrath as bait. When Kalara thinks that she's located Aberrath, she sends a call to Krall to let him know of her location, but Chekhov uses this to his advantage to triangulate the area of his lost crew. Kalara escapes when Krall's soldiers locate them, and James and Chekhov make a run for it outside, followed by Kalara and the soldiers. In an attempt to get away, James manages to ignite the engines by triggering combustion with a shot from his firearm, and the saucer flips and Kalara is crushed underneath as James and Chekhov barely manage to escape themselves. After recapturing Uhura and Sulu, Krall tells them that the coordinates that they sent out during the distress call were actually altered, and the rescue ship that the Federation will send after them will be left stranded in the nebula, leaving Yorktown unprotected. While taking some time to rest, Spock tells Leonard that his and Aurora's relationship ended because he felt like he owed a sense of duty to the Vulcan people, whose numbers have greatly dwindled. Leonard jokingly replies, telling Spock that he can now see how that would get her mad. Spock also tells Leonard how the death of Ambassador Spock has affected him, stating that he's made the decision to leave the Starfleet and continue the Ambassador's efforts to rebuild the new Vulcan. James and Chekhov are reunited with Montgomery when they get caught by one of Jayla's traps. Montgomery asks the captain if he knows why they were attacked, and James tells him that it was because of the Aberrath. Montgomery and Jayla give the captain a tour of the Franklin, the ship that Jayla had been using as a makeshift home. Montgomery picks up a distress call from Leonard and modifies the ship's cargo transponder and gets both Spock and Leonard to safety just as they were being surrounded by Krall's men. Krall eventually gets impatient as his soldiers tell him that they were unable to locate Aberrath. So he then takes matters into his own hands and threatens to kill Sulu in front of the rest of the survivors unless they tell him where it is. Then inside, one of the crew members begs Krall to stop, and here it's revealed to us that James actually gave her the Aberrath and that she had it on her person all this time. And Krall then uses the Aberrath to complete an ancient bioweapon. With this device complete, Krall intends to kill Yorktown's inhabitants and then attack the Federation. When James and Montgomery locate Krall's base and make plans to rescue the rest of the crew, a distressed Jayla argues that that's not the deal that they made, mentioning that her family died and that she barely escaped, and all she wants to do is just get out of the planet. After a heart-to-heart with Montgomery, he manages to convince Jayla to help them come up with a plan and rescue the rest of their crew. Before launching into space, Krall tests the bioweapon on Ensign, and Ensign disintegrates as Uhura pleads for him to stop, stating that Krall already has what he wanted. Moments after, James attacks the base on a bike. Krall shoots at James, but James has several holographic copies he uses as decoys and dodges a bunch of the attacks. James then serves as the perfect distraction for Jayla, Spock, and Leonard to free the rest of the crew. Manus, Krall's second in command, tells him to go launch the bioweapon while he deals with the intruders. So Krall and the Swarm launch into space. Everyone expects Jayla and James to be transported to the Franklin, and James goes to help Jayla, who was fighting with Manus, and they manage to teleport back to the ship together. Using a long drop from a cliff, the Enterprise survivors power up the Franklin and launch in pursuit of Krall. And in the meantime, the Swarm has begun to attack Yorktown, and James suggests that they try to lure the Swarm away from Yorktown long enough for the people to escape. However, Sulu reminds the captain that they stand no chance against the Swarm in the Franklin. Spock gets the idea that the Swarm function like bees and suggests that there might be a way to disorient them and break their coordination. And James suggests that they teleport him onto one of the ships within the Swarm, but Spock tells him that he's more qualified for this mission as he has some familiarity with the interior of the ship. Worrying that Spock isn't up to his full health, the captain agrees to let Spock take on the mission on the condition that he takes Leonard with him. Upon boarding one of the ships, Spock notes that the Swarm is communicating with one another through a cybernetic link, and he mentions that they need to send a signal frequency that will disrupt the Swarm. James suggests that they can just use VHF to distract and disrupt the Swarm, which reminds James of the music that Jayla had on the ship when she first brought him to her makeshift home. As the signal won't travel far, Captain James orders Sulu to get close to the swarm. Frank gets in the epicenter of the swarm and broadcasts the song Sabotage by Beastie Boys. The ship also sends disruption frequency to the control center in Yorktown, which amplifies the signal and destroys the swarm. Crawl escapes from the swarm and is chased by Franklin through Yorktown, and Franklin manages to intercept Crawl right before he reaches Yorktown's base. When James and Uhura go to the crash site, they discover Crawl has escaped. Uhura, Kirk, and Scotty discover from the Franklin's log that Crawl is actually Balthazar Edison, the Franklin's former captain, a pre-Federation human soldier. When Crawl and his crew were stranded on Ultimate by a wormhole, the survivors used extinct native technology to prolong their lives at the cost of the others, and they also repurposed the Ancients' dominant mining drones into their own swarm. Believing that the Federation had abandoned them, Crawl planned to destroy the Federation and resume the galactic conflict. James and his crew learn all about this and realize that Crawl is on his way to launch the bioweapon using the atmosphere regulator within Yorktown in order to inflict maximum damage. James orders Uhura to contact Yorktown and have them shut down the regulator until they can capture and kill Crawl. James identifies the only entrance to the regulator and pursues Crawl into Yorktown's ventilation system, where Crawl manages to activate the bioweapon. Before it can spread, Captain James, through the guidance of Montgomery, manages to eject the bioweapon and Crawl into space, where the weapon disintegrates Crawl and he dies. Just as James was about to be sucked into space, Spock and Leonard rescue him to safety and they're commandeered swarm ship. In the aftermath, Commodore Paris closes the files of Captain Edison and the USS Franklin crew, and though offered the promotion of Vice Admiral, Kirk decides to remain as a captain, Spock chooses to remain in Starfleet, and rekindles his relationship with Uhura. On Kirk's recommendation, Jayla is accepted into Starfleet Academy, and as the crew celebrates Kirk's birthday, they watch the construction of their new ship, the USS Enterprise A, and they resume their mission to boldly venture to a place where no one has ever gone before. And this is how the movie comes to an end.